In this video, we're going to be ranking the top 5 UFC fighters based off of their last performance. You can probably tell that there weren't any fights this weekend, so I've had to come up with this new content idea. But anyway, let's see how it goes. Hopefully it's not too controversial, but I'm sure you'll let me know if it is. And I'm going to be ranking these fighters based on 3 qualifying factors. Firstly, it's the level of opposition. So you're not going to see any fighters in here who've just blitzed through some guy much lower down the rankings. That wouldn't make sense. Secondly, it's the performance they put in themselves. So not necessarily exciting, but at least dominating. Not just edging a split decision against a solid opponent. I want to see a good, solid performance. And thirdly, what was at stake? So were they fighting for a title? Was their career in particular jeopardy before these fights? All these factors put together explain why I've ranked fighters in certain positions. So if you are ranking fighters yourself, make sure you use these criteria. So anyway, let's get straight into it. Coming in at number 5 is Mr. Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall's last fight was against Curtis Blaydes, where he knocked him out in the very first round. Now you may be questioning why Tom Aspinall isn't ranked higher up, but I will explain why. Firstly, let's look at the performance itself. It was spectacular. He absolutely smashed Curtis Blaydes. A fighter who is generally very durable, Tom Aspinall made light work of him. One criticism I would have for Aspinall's performance is that he did get caught a couple of times. He did hold his chin very high in the air, and this wasn't great to see. Maybe he just didn't respect Curtis Blaydes' power, that could explain it. But it wasn't necessarily the slick Tom Aspinall performance you've come to expect from him. Look, I'm criticising a guy who stopped Curtis Blaydes in the first round. I know it's tricky, but hey ho, I think he put in a great performance. What was at stake? He defended the interim title, which is just a bizarre thing to say anyway, because surely after winning the interim title, you should be given the opportunity to make it undisputed. But as we all know, Jon Jones, Stipe coming up later this year. Hopefully Tom Aspinall gets the winner. I'd love to see him fight Jon Jones, if Jon Jones does get that win, which is looking quite likely. But anyway, back to Tom Aspinall's last fight. No doubt it was a great performance. Did he necessarily defy expectation? It's arguable because, of course, he did suffer that TKO doctor stoppage loss against Curtis Blaydes previously when he injured his knee. But at the same time, I think Tom Aspinall was the favourite heading in there. People did think that if Curtis Blaydes was unable to wrestle him, that Aspinall would have the advantage everywhere else. So that's why he's 5th on this list. That's why he's not necessarily higher up. So I'm ranking Tom Aspinall at number 5. At number 4... and I did think long and hard about this, I'm putting Belal Muhammad. Now, I did say at the start that eking out a narrow decision wouldn't necessarily help your case. However, I'm not sure his fight against Leon Edwards was really that narrow a decision. I know that Leon came on strong towards the end. He did that elbow that cut Leon. But in general, it was a pretty dominant performance from Belal Muhammad. I was really impressed by the way he was able to nullify Leon's strikes. The things that had frozen opponents before, both Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, was Leon Edwards' sharp striking. You know how dangerous that head kick is. But Belal Muhammad just knew that if he put Leon on the back foot, he could completely nullify these and dominate him throughout the fight. And I have watched this fight back a couple of times. Other than that elbow and a few wrestling exchanges, Belal Muhammad was in no real danger. It was a dominant performance, so that's why he's ranked number 4. And also, Belal Muhammad was the underdog. It is hard when you're looking back on fights when you know the outcome to remember what it was like beforehand. But a lot of people, a lot of MMA pundits were saying Leon, he's just coming into the prime, he's so sharp everywhere, and Belal Muhammad is fairly limited in his tools. That just proved to not be the case at all. Belal Muhammad looked great on his feet, his pressure was awesome over the 5 rounds, and it was just a great performance against a fighter who everyone was saying was in their prime, was going up there on the pound for pound list. Belal Muhammad truly deserves the 4th spot on this list, and what's more, he became the undisputed welterweight champion. So argue with it if you want, but I think Belal Muhammad earned his spot number 4 on this list. Now the top 3 were fairly difficult to pick, the top 2 especially, but for number 3, I've chosen Dricus du Plessis for his fight against Israel Adesanya. Let's start by looking at the level of opposition. Now, Israel Adesanya, I think by general consensus now, is the number 2 best middleweight of all time behind Anderson Silva. So a win over him straight away is a huge tick. People might argue that after the Sean Strickland fight, we may be seeing a fighter on the decline, but it was also understood that Israel Adesanya had had time to recover. He was in the best shape of his life. He was also the favourite heading into that fight. And Dricus du Plessis, before that fight, remember, people were saying he's this lumbering guy, he's not quick enough for Adesanya, he's going to get caught out blitzing in. I think even myself, I had said something along those lines. But look, he did defy expectations in that regard. He beat an all-time great. So before we look at the performance itself, based on the level of opposition and the fact that he was an underdog heading into this fight, I think he deserves to be above the other two in this list. Let me know if you agree though, this was a really tricky one to place. So if we turn our attention to the performance itself, look, he stopped Israel Adesanya via submission in the 4th round. Israel Adesanya is no specialist when it comes to grappling, he's a striker out and out. However, he has also proven notoriously difficult to take down throughout his career. And for Dricus to wear him down, actually really hurt him with the strikes, wear him down through striking, and then to take him down and choke him out. I think fair play. It was an awesome performance. And I think because of the stoppage, he deserves to be higher up the list than Belal Muhammad. But again, I'm open to discussion on that point. But I think Dricus du Plessis is deserving of number 3 on this list. Now, I'm going to take a little bit longer talking about number 2 and number 1 because they have been so difficult to pick. I'll also do a few honourable mentions at the end for people who didn't quite make the list. Coming in at number 2, I'm putting Ilia Topuria, and he was really close to being number 1, but I've given him number 2 based off of his performance against Alexander Volkanovski. Now, let's start by looking at the performance itself. Prior to this fight, Volkanovski had been doing laps of the featherweight division. He looked better than every other fighter in every single aspect of his game. He was out striking people, he was out grappling people, he looked fast, he looked strong, until he ran into Ilia Topuria, who on the night looked better than him in every aspect. He didn't respect anything that was coming back his way. He just put it on Volkanovski and got him out there with a brutal knockout. It was savage to see, and it marked a real passing of the torch. Ilia Topuria being the next generation, the next featherweight climbing that pound for pound list. It was an awesome performance, very well deserving of number 2 on this list. And let's look at the level of opposition. Alexander Volkanovski is understood to be the best featherweight of all time. I think that's fair to say now. I think based on the 3 wins against Holloway, he's surpassed Holloway's legacy. You could argue for Jose Aldo, but I think most people would argue that Volkanovski is the featherweight GOAT. So the level of opposition here is undeniable. There is a caveat, of course, and that caveat is Volkanovski coming off that knockout loss to Islam Makhachev. I think this might be the one thing holding Topuria back from being number 1 on this list. Volkanovski, we've spoken about it before a couple of times, taking that short notice fight against Islam Makhachev. It was just such a mistake, such an ill judgment. Again, I know hindsight's 2020, but it was just such a mistake. And look, I'm not saying that Topuria couldn't have knocked him out anyway. He definitely could have. He possesses power to put anyone's lights out. But there is that caveat. Would it have been a more competitive fight had Volkanovski not come off that knockout loss? But we may never know. And if you're looking at what was at stake in this fight, Ilia Topuria became the featherweight champion of the world. Again, the stakes couldn't have been higher. If he'd have lost to Volkanovski, he definitely could have rebuilt. But for him to take that featherweight title off the featherweight GOAT, I think it'd be hard to argue against Ilia Topuria being number 2 on this list. And finally, we get to number 1. Number 1 on my list, you may have guessed it, you might not have done, is Max Holloway. Now, before we get into the performance or the level of opposition for Max Holloway, I want to look at what was at stake. We need to look back and remember that Max Holloway had lost 3 times to Alexander Volkanovski. That's really important context for this ranking, and especially what was at stake. Yes, he'd had good featherweight wins in the meantime, but that was almost a meme that had it not been for Max Holloway and Volkanovski, everyone else could have been champion. But Max Holloway was just beating all the potential contenders for Volkanovski. So Max Holloway really had nowhere to go in the featherweight division whilst Volkanovski was champion. It was so hard to justify a 4th fight. However, then came the Justin Gaethje fight. And bear in mind, had he lost this fight, a return to lightweight, where would that have left him? Let's have a look at the performance itself. Max Holloway didn't just beat Justin Gaethje. He put on an absolutely sublime performance, that turning sidekick that broke his nose, and then the finish itself. On the biggest stage possible at UFC 300, with seconds to go, he knocks out Justin Gaethje cold. This win has completely transformed his career. Instead of being a featherweight nomad where his options are limited, he's now given himself every option under the sun. A potential run at lightweight, a featherweight world title shot against Topuria, which is coming up later this year, and even a potential Conor McGregor fight. There's loads of interest in that fight now because he holds the BMF belt. I'm not saying the BMF belt in itself is enough to put him high on this list. I don't personally think that would be fair, but the options that he's given himself, how he transformed his career at this stage of his career, is enough to give him this #1 spot. The level of opposition as well. Whilst Justin Gaethje, yes, a previous interim title holder, is not the best of the best, it's still upper weight class, so I think that has to mean something. So yeah, that's where I'm ranking Max Holloway. I think he deserves to be #1 on this list. I think it's only fair, based off that last performance, moving up a weight class, and where he was in his career at that point. Let me know if you agree with that list. I think there'll have to be a few honourable mentions as well. Merab Dvalishvili for his performance against Sean O'Malley. Based on there never really being a threat of a finish, I didn't put him in. Same with Valentina Shevchenko against Alex Grasso. It was a really dominant performance, but there was never really a threat of a finish, so that doesn't make the cut. Alex Pereira against Yuri Prochazka, I've not put that in purely because Alex Pereira had knocked him out previously, so it wouldn't necessarily defy expectations like the other people on this list. But let me know what you think. I'd be really intrigued to see how you'd order your list. I think I've done a fair enough job. Maybe you could move around a couple of people, but yeah, let me know. And if you have enjoyed this video and you want to see more of this style of content, bear in mind I will be doing a 5 things we learned for Renato Moicano and Benoit Saint-Denis this weekend. If you enjoy this content, make sure you do subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.